Okay, hey everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. It's been quite a while since I've spoken to folks. My dog has been very sick for about the past, well, I don't know how long, probably the whole year, but uh, he's had pretty advanced cancer in the last few weeks, so I haven't been able to do a video because I've been taking care of him. And sadly, he passed away yesterday. We finally had to put him down. So, anyway, um, today I wanted to talk about two things basically. One, what we can say based on evidence from his public appearances about Joe Biden's psychological condition. And the second thing I want to talk about is the phenomenon we see of Democrats, Biden supporters, Biden cult members, whatever you want to call them, uh, blue, no matter who, folks. They're stubbornly refusing to acknowledge that Biden is in cognitive decline. We see all sorts of evidence of that, even though we can't say for sure exactly what sort of condition he has or how advanced it is or anything like that, unless we have uh, expertise in that domain and can, personally examine him, give him cognitive tests, and so on and so forth. But you know, he's been in the public eye for the vast majority of his adult life. So we have evidence over time, and quite a bit of it, because he's been a prominent senator forever, and then vice president, and then president. So uh, just a huge amount of video footage of him over the years. So we can see over time what his cognitive state seems to be based on how he expresses himself and other things, and whether or not that's changed over time. Um, Despite that, many uh, supporters and it seems like Biden himself are in denial that something is amiss, or they have some other reason why they don't want to publicly acknowledge that something is amiss, even if they um, you uh, might say something about it privately. So I come at this as a psychologist who I'm not a licensed clinical psychologist. I've never done clinical practice or anything, but I have had several years of graduate training in clinical psychology. I do have a PhD in social psychology. So I'm a, I feel like I have some uh, expertise relevant to both of those issues that I was talking about. And also, as most of you, I'm sure, I've dealt with elderly relatives who've had um, dementia. My mother only a few years ago, in 2021, passed away from Alzheimer's disease. So, although I didn't live anywhere near her and didn't see that much of her, um, I saw her decline over the years. And yeah, I see some similarities between what was going on with her and what's going on with Biden. Excuse me, I'm going to turn the air conditioning back on here, so hopefully it won't be too noisy, but it's a little hot. Okay, one of these days I'll get a green screen while so that things won't be so uh, blurry on the picture. But at least this is better than y'all seeing my messy office. So anyway, first of all, I just want to show you some examples of the kinds of just bizarre gaffes Biden has made over the years, and um, other indications that something is really amiss. But actually, before I even do that, maybe we should talk about what exactly we mean by dementia or cognitive impairment, um, and what sorts of forms of dementia there are, and how we can tell if someone has it. Um, let's see. Okay, so if we look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychological Disorders, uh, we can see that there are two general categories of dementia, or what in the latest edition of the DSM is called neurocognitive disorders that are not delirium, which is a temporary cognitive impairment. So you have major neurocognitive disorder and uh, mild neurocognitive disorder. So, I think the evidence suggests that Biden has one of those two general forms of cognitive disorders. So let's look at the criteria for mild cognitive disorder. Evidence of modest cognitive decline from a previous level of performance in one or more cognitive domains: complex attention, executive function, learning and memory, language, perceptual motor, or social cognition, based on one, concern of the individual, a knowledgeable informant, or the clinician that there's been a mild decline in cognitive functioning, and a modest impairment in cognitive performance, preferably documented by standardized neuropsychological testing or another qualified clinical assessment. B, and this is important to distinguish between the two, the cognitive deficits do not interfere with capacity for independence in everyday activities, such as paying bills, managing medications, uh, uh, managing the governmental affairs of the United States, etc. The cognitive deficits don't occur exclusively in the context of a delirium. In other words, they're persistent and generally they're progressive. And they're not better explained by another mental disorder such as depression or schizophrenia. And then you have several different subtypes of neurocognitive disorders. The most well known, of course, which is Alzheimer's disease, which accounts for roughly half the cases of dementia. Another very common one is Lewy body disease, which my stepfather had. Vascular disease, i.e., strokes, things like that. Parkinson's disease, which there's some speculation that Biden has because a Parkinson's disease specialist has visited the White House a number of times, and there are many others. So the difference from major data and major neurocognitive disorder, mild versus major, is obviously just a matter of severity. So evidence of significant cognitive decline from a previous level of performance, etc. The cognitive deficits do interfere with independence in everyday activities, um, and so forth. So what can we say about Biden's condition? Okay, let's see here. How do I change this? Okay, stop screen, present. Okay, well, I mean, let's just, in general, establish that there's been a change in Biden's cognitive state that has not uh, remained the same over the years. So let's compare, for example, uh, Joe Biden in 2012 versus Joe Biden this year. Or more precisely, this example is from the debate last month that uh, led many more people to be concerned about his condition and think he should probably drop out of the race than was the case before. Even though, I mean, certainly many of us, I'm assuming a lot of you watching this, as well as I, and many other people, had concerns about Biden's mental condition. And, back in 2019 and 2020, when he was running for president the first time, there were all kinds of signs back then. But let's go back to 2012, before there was evidence that any of this was going on. Okay. All right, here we go. Let's have a look. Okay, so 2012, not 2019.
By having a different set of rules for Wall Street and Main Street, making sure that we continue to hemorrhage these tax cuts for the super wealthy. They're pushing the continuation of a tax cut that will give an additional $500 billion in tax cuts to 120,000 families. And they're holding hostage the middle class tax cut because they say we won't continue the middle class tax cut unless you give the tax cut for the super wealthy. It's about time they take some responsibility.
Okay, so notice there, he's speaking with complete verbal fluency, none of this so-called stutter that it's alleged that he's had his entire life. He is speaking more fluently than I do, because I say and stuff like that more than he did in his clip just there. So certainly no evidence of any sort of cognitive decline in 2012, at least from this clip. And certainly there are many others you could look at and see. The Joe Biden of more than 10 years ago is a whole lot different in terms of the way he speaks and other things than the Joe Biden that we see now, or even the Joe Biden that we saw in 2019, which when, as I'll get to, he made a number of gaffes that just wouldn't be typical of, I mean, just are not the type of mistakes that we ordinarily make, even when we're elderly, or especially when we're elderly, such as my grandmother used to confuse the grandkids' names. He would say, Jet, Sean, she got mixed up about that, but eventually she realized who it was she meant. That's not dementia. That's just perhaps a symptom of normal aging, where we mix names up or forget names, or that's one example of that type of thing. But anyway, let's look at Joe Biden. This is a clip that I'm sure many of you saw from the debate or from hearing about the debate.
Mr. Ryan.
Eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President.
We finally beat Medicare. I mean, he's just totally lost there. Just nobody with normal cognitive function would make the sort of stumbles and then the major just nonsensical statement there at the end that he did. He couldn't get through a sentence coherently. And granted, he's not like this every single moment he's speaking, of course, Uh, he's not like, for instance, my mom was the last couple of years she was alive, where she could barely speak at all. He's still able to carry on a conversation and so forth, but someone with normal cognitive functioning would not do what he just did there. Even compared to 2019, there's a difference. So let's have a look at 2019 versus 2024. Okay, 2019 on the left, 2024 on the right.
I continue to think we have to make fundamental changes in civil rights. And those civil rights, by the way, include not just only African Americans, but the LGBT community.
He wants to get rid of the ability of Medicare
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I oppose.
making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if you will determine the outcome of this election, vote, vote, vote. If you're able to vote early in your state, vote early. If you're able to vote in person, vote in person. Vote whatever way is the best way for you, because he cannot stop you. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look.
A great line from Donald Trump there. He really kind of walked the line between being diplomatic and not attacking Biden for a condition that he can't help, and you're pointing out, hey, this guy's not cognitively fit to be president. And I can't stand Donald Trump either, of course. He was a horrible president, but he's not in the cognitive state that Joe Biden is. Even if you could make a case, as some people have tried to do, that there's some evidence of cognitive decline with Trump as well. It's not on the level with what we see from Biden. Now, there's a very clear difference there between how Biden was during his first presidential campaign in 2019 and 2020 versus how he is now. So it's understandable that a lot of people were, sort of fooled into thinking that everything was okay, where they thought, oh, well, he makes some gaffes, but he's not unfit to be president from a cognitive performance perspective. But there's plenty of evidence that he was not mentally the Joe Biden of earlier in his life, even in 2019 and 2020, and many of us called it out at the time. So Caitlin Johnstone, for example, one of my favorite political commentators, wrote a column in March of 2020. So, only about halfway through the presidential campaign of 2019-2020, giving dozens of examples suggesting that Biden might have dementia. And there were many others at the time, for instance, Glenn Greenwald and Tucker Carlson and various others, including me, and even some Democrats. So on the debate stage, Julian Castro and Cory Booker both pointed out that Biden, based on what he said, was obviously already forgetting something that he had just said a couple of minutes ago because he contradicted himself. He couldn't remember what he had just said. But there was lots of denial, and there shouldn't have been. Okay, let me just go to some specific examples here. One of the more egregious ones, which was reported by Bloomberg, was when he claimed to have met with the victims of the Parkland High School shooting in Parkland, Florida, which took place in early 2018. I think he did meet with them, but he thought that, and this was in, I believe, 2020 when he was recalling this. Article was written, 2019. So a little over a year later. So a little over a year after he met with the survivors of the horrible mass shooting at Parkland High School in Florida, he's forgetting that he was not an elected official at the time. So he claimed to have been vice president when he met with these kids. But he had not been vice president in more than a year. And there are other kinds of examples like that where he gets mixed up about who people are or when things happen and so forth. So for instance, he alleged in a public appearance that his son Bo had died in Iraq when actually he had died of brain cancer. He kept getting mixed up during the campaign about what state he was in at the time. And yeah, sure, you could say that, he's traveling a lot, so he may just not be able to keep track. But that happens so often. And there were many other examples of things like that as well. So here's a campaign appearance during the 2019-2020 campaign where a voter challenged him and alleged that there was corruption involved in his son Hunter's appointment to a Ukrainian gas company's board of directors. And so watch his response to this. Okay, so basically, what happened there? I don't know if you could clearly hear the audio. Um, he, uh, he just out of the blue got so angry at this guy that he uh, challenged him to a push-up contest and called him fat. Um, and yeah, this is a typical uh, thing that you see with people with dementia, is that they have these bizarre, out of context emotional outbursts. He had another one on the campaign trail where he, I forget the exact details, but he just lashed out at this union worker who confronted him when he was campaigning in Michigan, I believe. Uh, so, so that happened a lot. Uh, Another interesting gaffe. Okay, so you hear some of the deniers there in the audience starting to clap at this just absurdly dumb statement. Yeah, at the same time, he's still speaking more fluently there, and did most of the time at that time, which was back in 2019, than is the case now. Which is not to say that he can't occasionally speak coherently now, but still, I mean, I don't know about you, but I can't remember any occasion where I've said something this nonsensical. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. And yeah, there are just many other examples, and we could go on and on. So just the other day at a meeting of NATO, Biden introduced President Zelensky of Ukraine, which isn't in NATO. So, it shouldn't have even been there. He introduced him as Vladimir Putin, as President Putin. Then later in the meeting, he mistakenly referred to Kamala Harris as Vice President Trump. The examples go on and on. So just a few months ago, there was this. Right after the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, when it was hit by a freighter that lost power and crashed into it, here's what he said. I'm not sure if you can hear that. So let's see if I can boost the volume on this. So he claimed that he had taken the train many times over the Francis Scott Key Bridge from Delaware through Baltimore to D.C., but there were not any train tracks on the bridge. So, sorry, Joe. That really makes you look out of it. And then there are just all these cases where he I guess gets disoriented and doesn't seem to know where he is. So recently at the G7 summit in Europe, the various world leaders from the G7 countries assembled there were doing some sort of photo op involving them watching paratroopers hang gliding in. And so, yeah, they're there for a photo op. They're supposed to be all like watching the same thing, turned in the same direction, and so forth. But here's how Joe Biden handled the situation. Okay, so there he is. They're all clapping. He's just not seemingly aware of what's going on. He's wandering off. He's going to talk to another paratrooper, and some defenders of him have claims that, well, I mean, he's just being friendly. But you can see they're all moving toward him, and Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, is grabbing him and pulling him back over. Yeah, because they're there to have their picture taken, and he's off doing his own thing in his own mental world. So in short, I don't think there's much question at this point that I don't think there's much question at this point that he is very, very out of it and not fit to be president. But in addition to all the other reasons why he's not fit to be president, nor is Trump, obviously the support for genocide in Gaza and for Israel generally, the proxy war with Ukraine, the fact that as per the dictates of capital, we're not doing anything to seriously combat climate change or address the huge gap between the wealthy and poor in this country, the hundreds of thousands of people that are homeless and the tens of millions that are without health care coverage. You know all that. But he's just not all there. And a lot of people on the Democratic side of the aisle either have been denial about it for years and years or have been covering it up, and some continue to do so. So why is that the case? Well, putting on my social psychologist hat for a minute here, there are a couple of psychological phenomena that, at least a couple, that seem to be involved in this tendency for people to defend something that cannot be defended, i.e., Joe Biden continuing to run for president. So one thing that it seems apparent is going on here is what social psychologist Irving Janis called groupthink, which is, as it says here, a psychological phenomenon that occurs where a group of people's desire for harmony or conformity in the group results in an irrational or dysfunctional decision-making outcome. So it's irrational and dysfunctional for Democrats who want their presidential candidate to defeat Donald Trump in the fall, and also want Democrats to perform well in other elections, which, there's a coattail effect. So however the president does tends to affect how candidates for office at other levels do during a presidential election year. So it's irrational and dysfunctional for them to persist in having Joe Biden be the candidate for president against Donald Trump. And at this point, they've committed so much to him being in that position. So they've gone through this supposed primary process where he's on the verge of being nominated to be their candidate. All these people have given him a total of hundreds of millions of dollars in campaign contributions. All this ink has been spilled advocating for his reelection. And it's kind of hard to back out of that now. But going back to groupthink, what happens is that there's this illusion of agreement between people because they're not really talking to each other about the possible problems with the decision that they're contemplating. In this case, keeping Joe Biden on as the presidential candidate, and having made the decision to promote him as the candidate in the first place. So a lot of groups who fall prey to this sort of error think of themselves as not being able to do any wrong. They have this illusion of invulnerability. So Janus first came up with this notion of groupthink, this concept, in light of the Kennedy administration's severe miscalculation in pushing for the Bay of Pigs invasion, the attempted overthrow of the Cuban government, the Cuban revolutionary government, back in the early 60s, using a group of exiles who supported the former dictator Batista, who Castro and the other revolutionaries had overthrown. And they really thought that this could happen, that the Cuban government could be overthrown, that the Cuban people would back the return to this U.S.-supported dictatorship that there had been before in Cuba, rather than supporting the communist government of Fidel Castro. And they had indications that, there was no real prospect of this tiny band of counter-revolutionaries overthrowing the Cuban government. But they ignored this evidence and thought, well, hey, we're the best and the brightest. We know what we're doing. And plus, we're on the right side of history. We're fighting the battle against the evils of communism. The U.S. is the greatest country in the world, and so forth. They really believed that they were in the right in their attempt at the violent overthrow of a very popular government. And so they shut themselves off towards information that could have countered what they were thinking. They self-censored. They didn't talk to each other about their concerns. And as a result of not sharing their concerns about the flaws with the decision being considered, there's this what we call false consensus effect, this illusion among the group members that they unanimously support the decision being contemplated. So in this case that we're talking about, the decision to go forward with Joe Biden's candidacy, there really was not very much dissent within the Democratic Party, at least certainly not publicly, up until the debate. It was kind of the dam breaking as far as it being acceptable for Democrats or liberals or whoever to openly criticize Joe Biden running for president. And there's a lot of pressure to, not question the group. So, you see this where people are called names or accused of supporting Trump and so on and so forth for saying, look, Joe Biden is cognitively impaired. He shouldn't be running for president. And I'm sorry, I forgot what I was going to say next. So, gosh, maybe I'm not qualified to be doing this podcast. But seriously, let's look at some examples of the extreme conformity and pressure to conform that you see with the defenders of Joe Biden's candidacy. So, some people have claimed that the reason for Biden's poor performance during the debate was that all of Trump's lies distracted him. And that was the reason why he just stumbled over his words and said things that made absolutely no sense, which is a bizarre claim to make, especially since if you watched the debate, you saw evidence of Biden having some issues before Trump had even said anything, because Biden spoke first. And after that, they shifted to claiming that the reason for Biden's poor performance was because he had a cold and was taking cold medication that can cause cognitive impairments and mood changes, particularly in higher doses or in individuals who are sensitive to these substances. Given the demands of a high-stakes debate and the physical toll of illness, it is plausible that these medications affected his demeanor and performance. I'm not sure where that came from. This person doesn't say. But Biden himself, in an interview that he did with George Stephanopoulos from ABC, like a week after his disastrous debate performance, which many historians have said, it is arguably the worst, or arguably, unquestionably, it's the worst debate performance in the entire history of televised presidential debates. But Biden said of that, "Oh, I had a bad night because I had a cold and I was taking cold medication." Well, mainly he focused on supposedly having a cold. And many others have made the same excuse. So one question to ask about this was, if Biden had a cold, how come nobody talked about it coming into the debate? Why didn't they give him that excuse or make that excuse for him, up front? Or not to say that they should have predicted he was going to do poorly and say that he had a cold beforehand, but just say, "Oh well, Biden's had a cold. We hope this doesn't affect him." Nobody said that. And then immediately after the debate, Biden went to a campaign event at a Waffle House nearby and met and shook hands with everybody there. If he really had a cold, why did he do that? Did he just not care that he was going to infect other people? Well, perhaps he doesn't, but it just seemed very strange that they made this excuse and then immediately afterwards acted as if he wasn't ill at all. Here's another fun excuse. Biden's stammer really screwed him on this debate, and his age did show, but he gave clearer, straightforward answers, even though his energy was quite low. So yeah, Biden's stammer is the reason why he said we finally beat Medicare. That's a stutter, y'all. And the list goes on of the pathetic excuses that people gave. So here's Keith Olbermann, famous shitlib, saying it was completely plausible that cold medications were why Biden's debate performance was so terrible. Here's another one. Biden's family is allegedly blaming his top campaign advisors who were with him at Camp David this past weekend for his performance at the debate. Well, the trouble with that is that it wasn't just at the debate, of course, that his performance was so bad. He's that way quite often in public appearances. So more than a week later, when if it was really true that Biden had a cold and or was taking cold medication that had affected him somehow, he made these unbelievable gaffes at the NATO summit where he called Zelensky Putin and called Kamala Harris Trump. Or the gaffes that he's made in other appearances since that time, and of course before that time. Or has he had a cold for the past several years? Has he been so severely affected by Trump's lying? Not that Joe Biden doesn't have a long-standing pattern as an inveterate liar himself. He had to drop out of the 1988 presidential campaign, his first run for president, because he got caught plagiarizing a British politician's speech and telling various other lies about his resume, about his academic record, and so on and so forth. Lying that he went to South Africa and met with Nelson Mandela and got arrested with him for protesting against apartheid. Anyway, my point is, we've known, those of us who weren't in denial have known for several years now, certainly back at least to 2019 or 2020, that this man has some cognitive issues. And they've gotten worse. But why is it that there's been so much resistance to this idea that there might be a problem that maybe they better be better addressed by finding a different candidate? Well, certainly one thing that's happened is that just as there is about everything else, weapons of mass destruction, Putin and Trump colluded to steal the election for Trump in 2016, and Julian Assange allegedly was collaborating with Putin to influence the election, and on and on. The campaign of lies about Joe Biden has been very similar, or the attempt to cover up his mental state. So I was watching an analysis of the debate and of an interview or the interview with George Stephanopoulos a few days after the debate with some body language experts. And one thing they pointed out was that the chevron at the bottom of the telecast of Stephanopoulos' interview with Biden said at several points, and for quite a period of time, Biden says he had a bad night during the debate. And Biden himself said, well, I just had a bad night. And Stephanopoulos repeated that. And prior to the debate, you saw stuff like this commonly on network television and on the internet. Okay, so Sharp as Attack. Great compilation by Matt Orfalia. Where just over and over, these talking points to the effect that Biden is sharp as attack, etc., were shared by major media outlets in almost identical language by all of them. So, you can safely assume that what happened was that the White House distributed this and other talking points to them, and they just, kind of repeated them without question. And so, one thing we know is that when a factual claim is repeated over and over, such as Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, or Biden is sharp as attack, or Russia interfered in the 2016 election, et cetera, even though you don't present any evidence that whatever the claim is true, just the mere repetition of it results in people being far more likely to believe that it's true than if it wasn't repeated. Social psychologists call this the validity effect. And so that's certainly a lot of what's going on here, I think. Another thing is that supporters of Joe Biden, and one would assume Biden himself, are in a state of cognitive dissonance about his candidacy, where, on one hand, they have been saying and doing things for a long time, perhaps contributing to his campaign, campaigning for him, defending his mental state, defending his policies and saying he's a great president, etc. For a long time. They're very committed to the idea of not only Joe Biden being president right now, but Biden continuing for another 4 years. And yet there's all this evidence, most prominently, but certainly not only this recent debate, but a pattern of evidence that you can see over the years that he is not mentally well, and it's getting worse. So cognitive dissonance is when people start to feel uncomfortable or guilty about the fact that there's conflict between things they believe or between things they believe and things they've done in a way that is in some way harmful. It causes adverse consequences, such as increasing the likelihood that, from their perspective, an adverse consequence, the likelihood that Donald Trump will be elected president, or it makes them look foolish, and so in order to preserve their self-image, people do things to justify what they've said and done. That's the essence of cognitive dissonance. So people try to justify or rationalize a decision they've made, an action they've taken, something they've said, etc., in order to reduce embarrassment, guilt, regret, etc., about that thing that you've committed to. So Joe Biden has been committed to running for president, and his inner circle has been committed to promoting his run for re-election as president for at least a year and a half now. It's very hard to back down on such a commitment, and it's pretty obvious if you've observed Joe Biden over the years that the dude's got a big ego. He's very reluctant to admit that he's wrong about anything or acknowledge shortcomings or whatever. So, I get, just like with dementia, I guess we would have to examine him closely to determine whether, for instance, he has narcissistic personality disorder. But that's certainly something to consider in his case. But even short of that, people have a very hard time backing out of commitments they've made, because that would mean acknowledging that they were wrong. Joe Biden doesn't want to do that. Joe Biden doesn't want to do that. All these people in his inner circle, his entourage, in the media, among Democratic politicians, etc., they don't want to acknowledge that, look, there's something seriously wrong here. We've got to change course. On the other hand, there's some signs that the dam may be breaking. I didn't have this bookmarked, but I just wanted to share this with you. Actor George Clooney, famous actor George Clooney, who's been a long time close friend of a lot of bigwigs in the Democratic Party, just recently wrote a column in the New York Times calling for Biden to step down. Let me see if I can get an archived copy of it, because, of course, the New York Times has a paywall. So George Clooney says, "I love Joe Biden." Who doesn't, right? Joe Biden is so lovable. He's not an asshole who's, committed war crimes or been, a collaborator in war crimes for 50 years. But we need a new nominee, he says. Okay, he's a big organizer of fundraisers for the Democratic Party. He says he loves Joe Biden, considers him a friend, believes in him, believes in his character and his morals. Believes in committing genocide, apparently. But the one battle that Biden cannot win, even though, according to Clooney, in the last 4 years, he's won many of the battles he's faced. The one battle he cannot win is the fight against time. None of us can. It's devastating to say it, but the Joe Biden I was with 3 weeks ago at the fundraiser, which I think that was maybe before the debate, was not the Joe Big Effing Deal Biden of 2010. He wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate. Was he tired? Yes. A cold? Maybe. But our party leaders need to stop telling us that 50 million people didn't see what we just saw. We're also terrified by the prospect of a second Trump term that we've opted to ignore every warning sign. The George Stephanopoulos interview only reinforced what we saw the week before. He made gaffes in that interview too. As Democrats, we collectively hold our breath or turn down the volume whenever we see the president, whom we respect, walk off of Air Force One or walk back to a mic to answer an unscripted question. Although I've been emphasizing, this reminds me, although I've been emphasizing the denial due to cognitive dissonance that's undoubtedly going on in Biden's inner circle and the groupthink that prevents a lot of media talking heads and Democratic politicians and so forth from speaking up publicly, because they know they'll get harshly condemned if they do, and maybe their career won't continue to go so well. But despite that, they have to know at some level that there's something wrong, because if they didn't, at least subconsciously realize, hey, Joe Biden has some issues cognitively, why would they limit his public appearances in the way they have? Joe Biden has done fewer interviews and press conferences than any president in modern history. He basically campaigned for election in 2019, 2020 from his basement, or at least that was the case after COVID came along. Well, he didn't really make many public appearances other than in the presidential debates, even in 2019. So, if he's really competent to campaign for as well as be president, why are they doing that? Why are they so carefully limiting his public appearances? And even when he does appear in public, he's got a teleprompter or extensive notes every time he appears in public, even if it's just like a fundraiser or an informal meeting or what have you. There's all these attempts to try and prevent him from making the stumbles that he winds up making anyway. So this person points out, Joe Biden is so sharp and cognitively fit that he needs cheat sheets, flashcards, and pictured cue cards telling him what to do, what to say, and who to call on when he takes the podium to address the nation and or take questions. So somebody got photos of the cue cards that he took to a press conference recently, where he's got all his bullet pointed talking points. Where, okay, that's understandable, but he's also got lists of all the names of the reporters there, and interestingly enough, what their questions are going to be. So, in fact, and this was the case for his interview recently with George Stephanopoulos and another a couple of interviews he's done recently. They're not real interviews because the White House, the administration, gives those interviewing him a list of questions that they're permitted to ask him, or even a list of questions that they're required to ask him before he appears. And so he knows in advance what the questions are. They prepare him for the questions, and so forth. So right there on his cue card, he's got the question that she is going to ask before he's asked it. And, of course, it's got her name there, so he knows to call on them, and so forth. Well, I thought this was on here, but there were even instructions about where the podium was that he was going to be speaking at, and the route to take to get there, provided to him at either this or one of the other, or probably many of the other press conferences. So they stage manage every aspect of his public appearances and strictly limit them, which they wouldn't be doing if they didn't know that he's got some issues. Now, they may deny how serious they are, particularly publicly, but they know they exist. And so George Clooney's column in the New York Times maybe is kind of the starting point of the dam breaking, and people finally being willing to, Democratic Party insiders finally being willing to speak out publicly about his condition and the implications of that for his prospects in the fall. There have been kind of mixed opinion polling results regarding the impact of the debate, and just general gaffes that he's made during his public appearances for a long period of time. So if you look at polling, it doesn't look like he's lost that much in terms of head-to-head versus Trump after the debate, his most publicly visible disastrous performance. But there's some movement. So I believe I read that before the debate, the average of the polls, according to Real Clear Politics, had Trump up by 0.6% overall in a two-way comparison, and a bit more than that. I think it was like 2% if they included all the third-party or independent candidates. And currently, it's about a 2% gap in a two-way head-to-head, and a bit more than that, I think like 4 or 5%, if they include all the candidates in favor of Trump. So it could be a close race if we extrapolate what the polls say now and assume they're going to hold on through the fall. Probably not. Probably things will get worse for Biden if he continues to stay in the race, and these obvious indications that he's not mentally fit to serve office continue to occur, as assuredly will. But it's likely that I would say 95% certain that Biden will lose if he continues to be the candidate against Trump. But in terms of people's assessment of Biden's cognitive state, even at this point, the majority of Democrats, and that wasn't true before his disastrous debate performance, even the majority of Democrats are now saying that he's not fit to campaign for or be president, and that he should drop out of the race. The majority of various other groups women, black people, certainly, obviously, independents and Republicans, although, of course, Republicans want Trump to win. So a lot of them are like, yeah, sure, leave Biden in as your candidate, be my guest. He'd be easier to beat than other people you could run. But in any case, the cat is out of the bag now that Joe Biden has a substantial cognitive decline, probably some form of dementia. There's some indications that it may be Parkinson's disease, but certainly other possibilities as well. And certainly, you can't expect that he's even going to be as cognitively all there and competent in 4 years as is now. He's going to get worse. That's just one thing that is inevitable about dementia. It's progressive. So even if he can occasionally express a coherent thought now, he's probably not going to be able to in 4 years. And I mean, personally, I don't care what the Democrats do, because I don't want either Biden or Trump to win, and so I kind of sort of want Biden to be punished for supporting all the horrible policies that he has over the last 3.5 years, back just completely unequivocal backing for Israel and its genocide against the Palestinians, its persistence in this futile proxy war in Ukraine, where hundreds of thousands of young Ukrainian men have died in a obviously losing cause against Russia. Biden's, we've got just out of control inflation, particularly in terms of housing prices and food prices. In so many respects, Biden's presidency has been a disaster, and he's long been the most unpopular president in the last several decades. So, I mean, even setting aside his cognitive issues, I'm not sure why so many Democrats are so convinced that he's the man for the job for the next 4 years. But, tens of millions of Americans now know, even if they didn't before, that whether Biden has what it takes cognitively to serve in this job is just extremely doubtful. So anyway, I guess I've gone on for long enough about this now, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. What do you guys think? Is he going to drop out? What's it going to take for him to drop out? It's hard to predict at this point because there are an increasing number of top Democrats who are openly now questioning whether Biden should stay in the race, or just straight out, like George Clooney or a handful of Democratic elected officials saying he definitely should drop out. But there are others who are continuing to dig their heels in. And there are all kinds of factors, such as the fact that we're this late in the race, mitigating against their switching horses in midstream. But I mean, when you look at the campaign process over the last year and a half, there hasn't even really been a campaign on the Democratic side. They didn't hold any primary debates. Some states, such as Florida, actually canceled their Democratic primaries. Robert Kennedy, who I can't stand any more than I can stand Biden or Trump, But anyway, Kennedy was so unfairly treated by the Democratic Party apparatchiks that he decided to drop out and run as an independent. So, they haven't really held a primary. Now they're a month out from the convention. They've really put themselves in a pickle. Well, they made Kamala Harris, who people like even less than Biden, or about the same, I guess. The vice president. So she's probably going to be the pick if they do swap Biden out. So I mean, I guess that's another thing that's holding people back is they're not sure if they can win with Harris either, or as Joe Biden calls her, Trump. But at least they would have a chance if they went with Harris. I just don't see how they have a chance to win. Not that I care whether or not they win. In an ideal world, Jill Stein or someone like her would win. But at this point, there's no way that Joe Biden is going to become president. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. All right, I've ranted for long enough now, and hopefully I will be back with another rant sooner next time than this one was. I kept putting this off forever. So in any case, hope you have an excellent day, and you keep fighting for justice.